Incitement to insurrection to impeachment? Senator Gary Peters on the outrageous week on Capitol Hill and the leadership changes to come. And what does it all mean for the future of the Republican Party? Today is Sunday, January 10th, 2021, and this is Flashpoint.
Hi, welcome to Flashpoint, and this was one of those times when the title of our program couldn't be more appropriate. We arrived at quite a flashpoint on Wednesday. In one sense, it was not particularly surprising. The president had signaled for months that he wasn't going to accept the results of the election if he lost. You know, the real landslide of this election was in the courts. Dozens and dozens of legal challenges were turned aside, and yet no amount of explaining or fact-checking seemed to be enough for the president and his legion of followers, who insisted that an entire nation of clerks, secretaries of state, canvassers, judges, and justices were either clueless or corrupt. When you think about it, we resort to combat and war terminology all the time. We have to fight for what we believe in. We're declaring war on something, or we're going to battle for our rights. Well, this week, the marauders of the Capitol took it all quite literally and to horrendous and seditious effect. Most Americans watch with a combination of horror and sadness, and yet I have one friend who told me we should rejoice in what happened because in the end, democracy won. The Republic is safe and sound and clearly quite resilient. As he put it, in the end, all of the Whos were left singing while the Grinches realized that they couldn't steal Christmas. And yet we must deal with a great tide of residue. Should the president be removed from office, or is that a waste of time and energy 10 days from Joe Biden's inauguration? What are the speculations that the president will try to pardon himself? And consider the moment for the two parties, one that now finds itself in charge in the White House and both chambers on Capitol Hill, and one that is now sent into a kind of disarray. It's all this morning on Flashpoint. Perhaps a little lost in the events of Wednesday were the events of Tuesday night, which actually helped feed the frustration among the rioters. The flip of 2 Senate seats from red to blue in Georgia. That, of course, means Democrats now have the edge in both Capitol chambers, but it also means a massive shuffling of leadership on the various committees where so much work gets done on the Hill. And it means Michigan's Senator Gary Peters now becomes the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. Think about how many issues all of that entails at the moment, from the riots to the pandemic. It is good to have with us Senator Peters back with us on Flashpoint. So much, Senator, for you and I to talk about, but to start, let's just cut to the chase. As a member of Congress, you have a role to play in what happens now regarding the final 10 days of the Trump presidency. What do you think Congress should do about the president?
Well, there's no question the president is not fit for office. What we saw transpire this week is reprehensible. It was just a very dark day for our democracy. But as you said in the opening, we came back to work, made sure that we verified the votes of the electors across the country and certified those. So we will have a new president coming into office with Joe Biden on the 20th. But certainly, it was a horrible thing to see, and I think every person watching the television saw the attack on the citadel of democracy, our United States Capitol, as an attack on the country and an attack on them as well. Folks took it very, very personally. So we have to condemn this as aggressively as we possibly can. You know, I've supported a move that the vice president and the cabinet should invoke the 25th Amendment to remove the president immediately. Clearly, he is unfit. I have no idea what he may do in these remaining days, but it is a danger. And it's not just folks who are legislators. We have conservative groups like the National Association of Manufacturers, a very conservative business group that said the 25th should be invoked. He should resign immediately. You have newspapers that are conservative editorial boards like the Wall Street Journal saying he needs to be out of office now. You have a former cabinet member and the former chief of staff, Kelly, who said if he was still the Secretary of Homeland Security, he would be pushing for the 25th Amendment to have him removed. It is important for us to realize that he must be held accountable for what happened. And you mentioned that this has been going on. It's been this buildup that we've seen, particularly after the election, when he continues to put out conspiracy theories and make false allegations with no basis of fact, just angering his base in the process. We've not seen a U.S. president do that in the past, and we have to make sure a U.S. president never does it again in the future. So there needs to be accountability. There's no question in my mind.
Well, with 10 days left, we expect articles of impeachment will be submitted in the House. I don't see any way you get to 2/3 of the Senate voting to convict. Is there any point in moving ahead with impeachment proceedings?
Well, I think it's important for us to recognize just how damaging this behavior is and how dangerous it is. And that's really the point for me. And I've said this right after the election, when you had not just Donald Trump, you had folks all up and down in the Republican Party all putting out this false information. Folks who lost their races said it was because of fraud. Other elected officials said you raised all these kind of questions despite there not being any evidence. And as I said right from the beginning, I don't think folks realize how dangerous this is. When you start chipping away at the foundation of our democracy, which is that we have fair and free elections, then you start going down an incredibly dangerous path that will undermine the very fabric of this democratic republic that we have here. This is unacceptable. I think one of the things that would be great is if we had Republican officials come around and say, okay, yes, this was a fair election. Joe Biden won the election fairly. There was not fraud. Just tell the truth. If Republicans would start telling the truth, we will be on the path to healing, but they need to start telling the truth.
The reality that you're left with, though, is you have up to half of the nation that still feels very aggrieved. These are Americans who are a part of your America. And now, as you're a leading Democrat in charge of so much, given your committee responsibilities, what do you do now to try to get that America back together with the other half?
Well, I think there's two things. One is what I just mentioned, is that one reason why people feel aggrieved and are questioning what happened is because they're hearing that directly from a president, even though there's no evidence whatsoever, and they're hearing it from their local members of Congress, people they voted for. They have to stop. The Republican Party, if it wants to continue to be a legitimate party in this country, has to focus on facts and facts that we can agree on, which is based on the truth of what actually happened. But the other way is that then after we get through this, we have to come together. And I hope that this moment, this horrible moment that we just went through, will be a rallying cry for folks to come together as Americans first and as Michiganders first and understand that we have to solve tough problems. Let's not forget that we're in the middle of a pandemic that continues to impact people's health in a dramatic way. It impacts our economy. We need to be focused on getting through this pandemic. That should be the only thing we're focused on right now. And we have to come together as a country in order to do that. And it's incumbent on us, those of us who are privileged and blessed to be able to serve the people of Michigan or the country and the Congress, to show the kind of leadership necessary to find that common ground and solve the real problems that families are facing each and every day.
Well, let's move to those problems, many of which will be at the top of the list on your committee. I guess if you're a Democrat, the good news is you won control of the Senate. The bad news is you won control of the Senate, which now means you control all three levers in Washington: White House, House, and Senate. And the responsibility falls directly on you now for a lot of massive problems, starting with the pandemic. We've watched the vaccine rollout a little clunky, especially here. A lot of people complaining about how it's going here in Michigan so far. What is job one for you now to move forward in trying to defeat the coronavirus?
Well, certainly the rollout of the vaccine is absolutely critical. And I think this goes back, what we've seen with the rollout of the vaccine is the lack of a coordinated federal response to really step up and say that it's the federal government that can work with all 50 states. We have a president says, each state, you're on your own. There isn't going to be coordination. It's difficult to plan when you are all doing your separate things in response. It should have been that way right from the beginning of this pandemic, something that I was pounding the table on right from the beginning, part of what I oversee in the Department of Homeland Security. I was the ranking member before. I wasn't in charge, but we oversee FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management folks that had those responsibilities. They never treated this as the national emergency that it was and is. We have to do that with this vaccine development. I'm confident that you're going to see President Biden do that. He understands that. He's put out a very ambitious agenda to marshal federal resources to work cooperatively in close contact with state governments, but ultimately know that when you're dealing with a national emergency, it requires a national response and a strong federal response. And getting more of the vaccine in people's arms as quickly as possible is absolutely critical to getting us through this crisis.
Another massive problem that we have right now has been pushed to the back burners here a little bit, and that's this issue of cybersecurity and this massive hack that we've watched that appears to be at the hands of the Russians. How do we move forward? How do we act? What kind of action should we be taking against the Russian actors or Chinese actors? Lots of international mayhem, no doubt, that wants to be visited on us, but what do we do to get our house in order?
We must, again, be more coordinated in fighting the cyber attacks that we're seeing from state actors as well as criminal actors that are constantly engaged in cyber activities. And I've often said probably our number one national security threat is cyber. We have to strengthen our defenses. And it's going to take a couple things. One, we've got to be more coordinated. We have right now, and this has been a source of frustration for me, we have federal agencies that aren't working together. They don't cooperate to the extent that they should. They need to share information. Even after this massive attack, cyber attack on the federal government, it was difficult to know exactly where the attack was, what agencies were impacted. It showed that they were not working together. And this is going to take a whole of government approach. And government's going to have to work with private industry as well. Private industry was also hit as a result of the cyber attack. And oftentimes these bad actors go through the path of least resistance. They look at the weakest link, and some of those are smaller businesses, mid-sized businesses. We have to think comprehensively about that and harden our defenses. But it takes more than just hardening your defenses. Just think of your home. You want to make sure that you prevent a burglar from getting into your house, and you can put an alarm system and locks on your door. But you also have to let that burglar know if you get into the house, you will be caught and you will be punished, and there will be consequences for it. There needs to be a deterrent factor. We do not have a sufficient deterrent factor to let countries, state actors, and others know if they engage in these kinds of behaviors against the United States, they will be caught and there will be repercussions. And we have to talk through and decide exactly what we need to do in those situations.
And speaking of attacks in the United States, and I'm sorry that I've only got about 30 seconds left before I got to get to a break here, but what should we do about domestic terrorism, which is kind of what we saw happen? Clearly, we need better security at the U.S. Capitol. What about beyond that?
It is much broader. The U.S. Capitol clearly needs to have, I'm launching an investigation to find out exactly what happened to make sure it never happens again. But we have a rise of domestic terrorism and the insidious ideology of white supremacy. We saw the domestic terrorism here in Michigan with the plot to kidnap our governor. Yep. This is something has to be focused on. The Trump administration has not focused on this the way they should. I will make it a priority. We're going to be holding hearings. We're going to do investigations. And I look forward to having a partner in President Biden to finally deal with domestic terrorism in a way that treats it with all of the seriousness that it deserves.
So sorry to interrupt, Senator. I got to get to a break. I so appreciate the time. Thanks so much. Stay safe. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Devin.
Senator Gary Peters on Flashpoint. More coming up. What's ahead for the GOP? It's next.
Out with the old, in with the new. Brand new windows in 2021 from Wallside. And a new incredible offer to make it easier for you. Buy one window, get one free. Double hung sliders, casements, half rounds. Any style, any color, any size. No limits, no restrictions. Plus 5 years, no interest, no down payment. And only Wallside can do it because
we are the factory.
Schedule your safe at home or virtual estimate at wallside.com.
Visit GollingBloomfield.com and lease or buy your next vehicle online. Only at Golling Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram in Bloomfield Hills. During the Start Something New sales event, take home the 2021 Jeep Gladiator Sport 4x4 starting at $269 a month employee, $299 friends and family. Or lease the 2021 Jeep Wrangler Unlimited 4x4 for just $319 a month employee, $369 friends and family. You search, you request, we deliver to your home or office. Shop GollingBloomfield.com. Golling Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram in Bloomfield Hills.
Love lower than low prices? Then get more ways to save at Kroger, where you can find personalized coupons, weekly deals, and rewards like fuel points. All for prices that are lower than low. On food that's fresher than fresh. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
People talk to me about Frank McGeorge all the time, where misinformation spreads all around the world like wildfire. Frank just has this really measured approach to some very complicated things. Frank is an emergency room doctor.
I am seeing firsthand what's really going on.
His producer, Sarah Mayberry, has a master's degree in public health.
Eligible to get vaccinated today, our own Dr. Frank McGeorge.
And there it is.
Frank is always there for us, and right now he's always there for you. Welcome back. You know, in 7 of the last 8 presidential elections, the Republican candidate has lost the popular vote in America. And now Donald Trump has become the first president since Herbert Hoover to lose the White House, the House, and the Senate during his term in office. And after Wednesday, it's a fair question to wonder what is ahead for the grand old party. Let me note that we put out quite a few requests to Republicans to join us today, including Congressman Tim Walberg, Congresswoman Lisa McClain. They declined our invitation, as did Ron Weiser, the incoming head of the Republican Party in Michigan, with Laura Cox stepping down. But very happy to have 3 Republicans who have been frequent guests on our program back with us. The former mayor of Royal Oak, Dennis Cowan, is with us, as is Tori Sachs, the executive director of Michigan Rising Action, and outgoing Congressman Paul Mitchell, who decided 2 terms in Washington was enough and decided against running for re-election. Gang, thanks so much. Congressman Mitchell, let me start with you and your reflections about where the party goes from here. Is it fair to attach what happened on Wednesday to a Republican problem? Because we saw a new poll shows us that 18% of American Republicans support what the rioters did in charging the Capitol.
Well, 2 things. So let me make the point. I think that the mob was comprised heavily. There's intelligence information by white supremacists and neo-Nazi groups that are using the Trump rhetoric, the Trump supporters, as their excuse for anarchy, to be absolutely honest with you. And unfortunately, the conduct of the president and Rudy Giuliani and some of those folks simply encouraged them. In my opinion, I stated before, they incited insurrection. They incited a riot. Where the party goes from here, I've said in multiple times, we need a serious reassessment of our leadership in the party. Our leaders, the leaders in D.C., failed to forcefully tell the president, you lost the election, it's over, we're done, and let's move on. And they should have stood up and done that. And many, to this moment in time, as you know, Devin, haven't done that. And I just don't understand that. All the conspiracy theories now, they've all been debunked. The president lost. Our democracy depends on, I've said a number of times, politicians being willing to accept winning and losing with some level of grace and maturity, or we simply can't function as a democracy. And this is a perfect indication of that.
Let me let Tori weigh in, because, Tori, a lot of Republicans now want to take the remarks of what we just heard from someone like Paul Mitchell and sort of fold them into the, well, he's become a never-Trumper Republican, which is like a separate variety of Republican. What are your thoughts, Tori?
Look, Paul Mitchell has been around the Republican Party a lot longer than Donald Trump. I think that we can't be a party of one person. We have to be a party of ideas. And over the last 4 years, I think we've had some great ideas. We've had some great policy. Paul worked on them. Other Republicans in the House worked on them. But at the end of the day, what happened this week cannot happen again. And we have to be honest, and we have to be open about what happened, who started it, the rhetoric that incited people. And we have to make some tough decisions. People might not like, having to admit that they were wrong in supporting someone, but that's what we have to do right now. And we have to look to leaders like Peter Meijer. He's an incoming congressman from West Michigan, has a great op-ed in the Detroit News this morning. I really encourage everyone to read it, because it's time to have some tough decisions and hold some people accountable.
In fact, Dennis, as I come to you, let me quote Peter Meijer. This is a brand new Republican congressman coming to Washington from Michigan, taking Justin Amash's seat. He's talking about the rioters here, Dennis, and he says they were being lied to. They were being misled. Some of my colleagues in Congress, they share responsibility for that. Many of them were fundraising off of this Stop the Steal grift. I don't understand how you can look in the mirror and go to sleep at night without that weighing on your conscience.
I agree with Congressman Myers. I read that this morning, and I was very heartened by his comments. I'm going to be very blunt about this. What the president said about Vice President Pence, senators and congressmen who have supported him over the last 4 years, threatened and demeaned them this week, was wrong. His comments at the rally and those of others were reckless, and they led to what could have been a catastrophic situation. But for those Capitol Police that were on duty and others, this could have turned into a significantly more tragedy than occurred. So what we need to do is, I believe, I'm calling for new leadership of our party. We need to look to individuals like Senator Tom Cotton, Nikki Haley, Senator Rubio, Senator Tim Scott, and others that need to step forward to lead this party through the next election cycle. You know, despite the loss of the presidency, we did very well in the House, gained seats.
Yeah.
I believe the Democrats will overreach in the next couple of years and will be in an excellent position.
Dennis, I think it's really important for me to, let me quickly point out that I'm going to assume that it took pains for you to arrive at that conclusion because you've been very supportive of Donald Trump for these 4 years.
It did, Devin, but I remain a Republican. I am going to work for the, support and preservation of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all Americans. I'm going to remain within the party. We're going to work hard. We're going to do the right thing. But I think has been pointed out by many, including Congressman Myers, this is a little bit of time for reflection, as it is after every loss in a presidential election.
Yeah.
But I think it's time for new leadership. I will continue to work with all like-minded Republicans, including those who support the president. But we need to move forward and move the party forward in a different direction.
Paul Mitchell.
Devin, let me quickly make a comment here that I stepped away from the Republican Party when I saw leadership after the election failing to address responsibly the outcome of the election. I believe this was on a path that was going to a bad place. And I put out a tweet at one point that said, hashtag stop the stupid. I won't get into the details, but I will share with you that I got a call from a senior person at the White House telling me they owed them better, that I didn't understand, and threatening me.
Threatening you in what way?
That they would have any and all information to blow me out of the water was the terminology. Now, I expressed to them, where I grew up as a kid, threatening me wasn't such a hot idea because okay, let's go. But that style of working with people is reflective of the mentality that the White House has evolved to, that if they don't get their way, they will threaten people. They will put them in one way or the other at some personal or political risk. I don't know. But the point was made, and I told them to go pound sand. But I'm putting that politely since your folks have to censor, but you got the idea.
Broadcast rules. Thank you for considering those. Yes.
FCC.
Tori, because this president then, I don't know what you want to call what will happen here as he moves into a kind of exile for a while, but President Trump remains, I think, very popular with many, many Republicans. We saw that also in polls even after what happened on Wednesday. How do you move or cede leadership from someone who I don't think has any intention of giving it up? Tori?
I think we have to have a serious conversation, and I think we need to have leaders who are willing to step up and tell people the truth. I think people have arrived at the conclusions that they've arrived at because they've been told over and over in certain echo chambers that the election was stolen, that the votes were rigged, that somehow Donald Trump was still going to be president of the United States even though he lost the election. Those things are just simply not true. And we need to have leaders who are willing to step up and say that. And we have to have people who are willing to follow the Constitution. I think what Mike Pence did was absolutely remarkable and great this week. A true public servant who's following the Constitution and upholding his constitutional duty. And for anyone to attack people who are following the Constitution, who are standing up for democracy, the American dream, those people are not what I view as a Republican Party. Those people are not Republicans. And so it's time for Republican leadership to step up and say that. And it's on all of us who go out there and talk about the Republican Party, who hold liberals and their policies accountable. And it's up to all of us to start saying that.
I got to get to a break, but that was really very reflective of all three of you. I'm grateful that you accepted the invitation to be here. Stay safe, and we'll talk to the three of you really soon. Thanks.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Happy New Year, friends. We'll take one more break and wrap things up right after this.
Whether on the west side, east side, or downtown, Suburban Ford has you covered. With 3 easy locations, you're just a short drive from Michigan's largest Ford dealer. Go to drivesuburbanford.com, click Express Store, start pricing your car your way. Save time, save money. Go to drivesuburbanford.com today.
FanDuel's simple app makes it easy to get closer to the game. But to get Dan even closer, we've arranged for him to experience a genuine James Harrison tackle.
Wait, what?
FanDuel. Play free all season.
While we fight the COVID-19 pandemic, the need for blood donations is constant, urgent, and essential. Local 4, Gardner White Furniture, and the American Red Cross are teaming up to help. Donate blood at these Gardner White locations on January 14th or 15th. Everyone who gives blood gets a $50 off coupon for Gardner White. One donor from each store will win a $500 Gardner White gift certificate. Go to redcrossblood.org to make an appointment and help save lives.
If you were seriously injured in a car accident, who would you want on your team? You'd want someone who's going to listen, you'd want someone who's going to fight for you, and you'd want someone who can win.
If you've been injured in a car accident, pick up your phone and give us a call right now. And remember, if you can't come to us, we'll come to you. Call 855-75-EP-LAW. Because at Leon Ponto, we don't win unless you do.
A little bit of news developing this morning. Republican Senator from Pennsylvania, Pat Toomey, has become the second GOP senator following Lisa Murkowski of Alaska to urge President Trump to resign. What happens now in the week ahead? We'll follow it for you next week on Flashpoint. Meet the Press is coming up next. Have a great Sunday.